I'm here today with composer Pamela Madsen, and I'm very excited to talk with her about her work as a composer and musician. Pamela is a composer, performer, theorist, and curator of new music. From her massive landscape-inspired projects and intimate chamber music creations to her multimedia opera collaborations and immersive deep listening works, she has created a body of work focusing on sound and the environment. Thank you for joining me today, Pamela.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, so one of the things that we talked about while you were here at WISC was your project on the Oratorio for the Earth and how women artists had been an inspiration for you. Can you talk about the women who inspired you for that project and how does this work for you?
Okay, the Oratorio for the Earth was a project that is an hour-long concert-length work that celebrates the earth and the environment. And the composers that I had been working with were Pauline Oliveros, who does deep listening. And so she's one of the artists that has been influential to me. I studied with her, and even in New Mexico, retreats where I learned about sound and in the environment. Then the other work that I had been working on was with Mary Hunter Austin. And she's also an environmental author from the early 20th century whose work I investigated. And it helped me to create an idea around the earth and the environment. The other artist that influenced me is the collaborative artist that I work with, Judy Chicago. And she's also a New Mexico artist. And the idea of creating educational projects, and I work with her on envisioning the future. So my works have a social impact. So the Oratorio for the Earth is a concern for the earth and the environment. And through the sharing of these really impactful pieces, then people will be more concerned for the earth and the environment.
Yeah. We got to see a wonderful kind of intimate participatory performance, and we all as audience members got to participate. What is it like for you creating works that allow that kind of participation? What is that like for you as a composer?
Well, as a composer, I'm also a performer. I started out as a
Yeah.
performer. And I really, when I was performing new works, I really liked being invited into the composer's space and to understand how they created ideas. So I wanted to create that environment when I do pieces. So the pieces also involve that participation between the composer and the audience and the ensemble, and I'm breaking down that boundary across the board. So in this, I worked with, for instance, in the Judy Chicago, I had worked on a participatory opera where people were able to come and engage in being, envisioning the future in this work. In the Oratorio for the Earth, these scores are these big sonic mandala pieces. And so then the audience, I invite them to perform and also share in that space. The piece that you got to perform was There Will Be Stars with the poet Sarah Teasdale. I've set her works. And that piece is incorporated in the final work in the Oratorio for the Earth.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to see how you weave women artists, women writers, poets into your work. It's really amazing to see that influence and how it plays out. During these kind of strange and difficult times, how have current events like the Black Lives Matter movement and COVID-19 impacted your composing and performance? I know there's, of course, logistical challenges to performing, but does it also change the way that you compose?
Well, yes, the Oratorio for the Earth was supposed to be performed on May 9th, 2020, with 300 people. So, and it had involved modern, medieval, a vocal trio, and Nicholas Isherwood, a bass baritone coming in from Europe, plus full orchestra, many choirs, and a spatialized big 800-seat concert hall. So that work could not happen. So it was postponed, and it was funded by National Endowment for the Art, New Music USA. It was a big project that was really had a lot of traction, and so it will be premiered, but at a later date. And
Yeah.
as the COVID, uh, the time of pandemic continues, I'm re-envisioning the work so it will be able to go up in different courses, smaller chamber music works, online performances, and also connecting in a global way. I mean, it's an oratorio for the earth. So now I'm thinking of how can I connect this piece globally by
Yeah.
having outreach and concerts online. And I have a new music ensemble that I direct and perform in, and we did not stop playing during this whole isolation time. We met every week, 25 players, and we performed online. And I'm preparing students to be able to work in these ways, to be able to
Hmm.
listen to each other across like we are doing now,
Yeah.
communicate, and also play in an active way online. So
Yeah.
that's, but then the subject matter changed as well with the
Hmm.
ideas of imminent disasters, and also the sensitivity to freedom, justice, and social justice issues of Black Lives Matter. I looked at creating works that were really important and impactful. And
Hmm.
so I turned to looking at the plight of Mary Hunter Austin, and I actually just really worked on creating my new opera about her life,
Hmm.
uh, and about why women went west. And it has a lot to do with aspects of social justice and freedom, which are at the heart of Black Lives Matter. So this is why then I composed all these pieces based upon all of her work. And she was very sensitive to also issues of social justice, indigenous rights as well. And so she was a really great character to look into all of her writings and set them. So it
Yeah,
was a,
Pamela, I want to ask you a little bit more about this project. Of course, here in Santa Fe and you in California, women going west is a theme and something we like to explore and think about. But your performance really has these kind of themes that I want to ask about and ask you to talk a little bit more about. You mentioned to me that women have three different selves, three, there we go. Their relationship to work, their relationship to family, and their relationship to the public. And that these relationships can cause conflicts. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, and then maybe talk about why you went west. What brought you to the West?
well,
So there's
I,
kind of two parts to that. Sorry for a long question.
that's fine. The opera is called Why Women Went West.
Yeah.
I Married, Mary by herself. And she wrote her autobiography in early part of the 20th century as in the third person, and would talk about her different selves, um, herself as an inner self and her outer self. And this idea of those divisions of self and the kind of public persona and the private persona is really something that I always have in my work. And I
Hmm.
noticed many poets' works as well. I mean, I've said Anne Sexton, I've said Sarah Teasdale, and they all have this kind of confessional idea of inner and outer self. And so that is the opera embodies that, not
Hmm.
only in the text that I'm setting, but in the way I'm setting the text, because I create layers of composition. So the work has one layer, which is maybe an outer projection, and then commentary, which is an inner projection, and then dealing with those conflicts of how to resolve those different issues of self. So this is what the opera is about. And the
Mhm.
idea of going west. Now, I come from New York City area, and Mary Austin's story resonated with me. She was early 20th century. She came west to settle in homestead in California and start a new life there because of poverty, because of illnesses, because of things that were happening in the uh, west, in the east. And also, many women came because they could find freedom.
Yeah.
Um, and they could find freedom of voice and freedom of expression without this Victorian ideals of New England society, perhaps. And I went to Yale. I from New York. I've been in that whole scene, and it is very wonderful. But it also has a closed sense of expression that you work within these certain boundaries. So I was not. I didn't have very many colleagues as composers when I was a young composer, and I came west because I wanted to study, and I thought, well, the West had all these ideas. They had the Women's Philharmonic, which was in San Francisco, which I'm on the board of now, and then it had Pauline Oliveros, my mentor, was teaching down at UCSD.
Mhm.
So I tell this story to my students. People say, "Oh, that's hard to go," and I just went. I packed up and I hitchhiked my way across the United States as just to get there and then
Mhm.
start over. And I thought it was an oasis, but as like Mary Austin found, well, no, it isn't. You really still have to make your own way. There is openings, and but you still have to have the strength to make your own way. So this is my story. And then luckily last year I was on sabbatical from teaching at Cal State Fullerton, and I decided to retrace my past of 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And I was awarded a McDowell Colony and U Cross and
Mhm.
WISC residencies. So I followed those all the way across the United States to find almost the same path that I had taken years ago, but now as a composer looking back and documenting it. So this was a wonderful time. I wrote the oratorio for the air as well as the uh, opera
Yeah.
um, West. Okay, that's the story. If you
I think it's great. Um, Once you compose a piece, what is it like for you seeing it come alive with performers and musicians? What is that like for you?
well, as a performer, I work at the piano to compose, and I
Yeah.
record on my cell phone all this all my performances as I'm working in the process. For
Yeah.
larger pieces of orchestra pieces, I try to hear all of them. I have two grand pianos here, and my husband is a pianist, and sometimes
Yeah.
we play through big orchestral pieces on the two pianos to kind of demonstrate or try to hear the massiveness of the sound. But nothing compares to the actual live, engagement. I'll
Yeah.
just I also write pieces which have to be engaged in the moment, so I can't do a MIDI realization of them. They have pieces that are left for the performer to make decisions on, so that the work is very much alive in the moment. So that's really interesting. And I'll just tell you about an experience. I was so lucky I got to go to, I was on another residency, American Scandinavian Foundation in March. And they brought me out there to the Pulsar Festival, which is at the Royal Danish Academy of Music in Copenhagen. And
Hmm.
I was going there to research a new work based upon my own heritage. My father's from Denmark, and I wanted to find out what he heard when he was there. So what they did in that experience was so extraordinary. They chose my pieces, which were the most experimental in a way. They were for orchestra, but the orchestra had to rehearse in the moment. And they were also specialized pieces in large concert halls. So in a way, I had to orchestrate the piece with the players and engage them in reenacting my act of composition. And so they played Big Basin, Song of the Redwoods, and had to imagine the redwoods of California. And that was interesting to kind of translate that energy of that experience and get the feedback of player, players from Denmark who had never been to California, get them to understand what California is about. And they loved it. It was beautiful, and they did a wonderful recording. And then another piece, it also, I work in engaging in a space and sort of painting that space and putting players in that. So I did another piece, 57 Buzzards, about buzzards, based upon Mary Hunter Austin, and her work, The Land of Little Rain. So it was wonderful to bring the experience of California and also engage with these performers in the moment. Um, I also have very conventionally notated chamber music that can be really read and performed exactly. And
Yeah.
Consecrating Mother, and it is a piece that I think you might be sharing. And I work with the top level of players. And while I'm a pianist, these are super pianists and super cellists, and they can then take the piece beyond my imagination because they can play it to perfection and beyond, and then relive that moment.
I'm sure that's really satisfying to see kind of a master performer embody your work.
Yes, yes, and there's this exchange that goes on, and I collaborate during the creation of my works so that it's like an exciting time. You know, I give them a little bit of it, they send it back to me. I work with them online like this I'm talking to you, and
Mhm.
the work grows while we're experiencing that. I have a piece that's going up at Carnegie Hall, hopefully, if it opens, which I might play a little excerpt for you
Mhm.
from, and it's for a pianist from Australia who I'm working with now, and she's going to tour the world, hopefully, next year, playing this piece, which is also from the opera.
So one more question, and then I would love to hear you play for a few minutes. Um, we at WISC loved meeting your partner, Eric, the other half of Mad Duo. Can you talk a little bit about balancing your relationship, art, and creating together? It's so beautiful to see you guys interact together.
Well, yes, the thing about it is that we're both pianists, we're both composers, and we're both improvisers, and
Yeah.
yet we're both theorists. We have the same educational path. We met together in graduate school, and yet we're very different. He's a jazz pianist, and I'm a classical pianist. So we have a difference in our styles and aesthetics. So that difference makes us this mad duo because while we're the same, we're extremely different because he hears, rhythm even differently than I do because he's a jazz musician. And so we also can share our creative works as well. He's also in technology, and I'm also in technology. And so I can listen and to his work, and he can listen to mine, and we can share and create even more works. It's pretty wonderful actually to have somebody like that, and I'm very lucky to have him be part of the Mad Duo, and really work with him daily. I mean, he helps me, and I also support his work, and then we try to also play together our shared work.
So, Pamela, can you tell us what you worked on while you were at your residency with us here at WISC?
Well, I just wanted to mention the extraordinary circumstances of that. I was able to work at the piano, a grand piano that was in the residency, and it was a wonderful old grand piano that had been played by famous people in the past. So it had this wonderful resonance, and I was able to create and perform and play and have breakthroughs in my own compositional and performance work. So I was able to create my oratorio for the earth and also the start the opera. And so in that piece, I created quite a few pieces, Lost Horse Mind, Lament, and then a piece, It Snowed in Spring, based upon poetry of Robert Frost as well, and then Center of Centers, based upon the text by Rilke. So I've set a lot of text by Rilke in my oratorio. And then now the Hour Bows Down, as well as the final work, or Earth Horizon, which is based upon Mary Hunter Austin's autobiography. So this was that I was able to do, and then perform those works. I shared them there at WISC as well in performance. And then what was extraordinary about the residency is that the house is filled with readings of women in um, and scholars and women's theory and feminist theory. And so that was quite inspiring because I'm an avid reader and I felt I had to read everything. But I'm also a theorist and a scholar, and I was writing a chapter for a book while I was there, and this was a collection called Between the Tracks, and it's musicians on selected electronic music, and a collection that goes beyond the canon to analyze influential yet under-examined works of electronic music. And so in that extraordinary place, I conducted all these interviews on women in electronic music. And then and I wrote about Anne LaBerge and her work. She came she came into the studio via Skype, and we talked about everything and really had an impactful discoveries about how women work differently and the
Yeah.
idea of women in difference. And this was something that I wanted to make sure that we did discuss, is that idea of why women and women create in a special way. They have different voices, as well as any issue of diversity I celebrate, because we can bring difference uh, to the art world. And art can then transform life and can make changes in society. So this is something I was able to complete that book. It's going to that chapter, and the book is published and will be released on in September 2020. So it's not only I was able to do all the scholarly work as well while
Yeah.
I was there, as well as the creative work.
It's always wonderful to hear what people are able to accomplish in a residency, and also how things change, or they're able to explore new things in their work or discover things, that new space and new books, as you mentioned, the wonderful Marta Weigel collection that surrounds our fellows. It's always nice to see what happens when people are there, and that you had a kind of balance of scholarly work and also your creative production. Yeah.
Right, and as I also was there as a researcher to look at Mary Hunter Austin. And what transformed in that time was the realization I came to find her house, and
Yeah.
it was no longer there. And her legacy was being lost.
Yeah.
And there are many important women in the early 20th century. And you introduced me to wonderful books that were being written about,
Mhm.
and so I investigated their stories as well. But became aware that she needs to be celebrated.
She
And
does. She absolutely
yes,
does. Mary Hunter Austin wrote the foreword to Mrs. Curtin's book, Healing Herbs of the Upper Rio Grande, and they encouraged each other throughout their lives, which we have more letters here. So it's
oh,
wonderful.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see these women be celebrated in music and in composition and other art forms, like what you're doing. It's just fantastic. Will you play for 5-10 minutes for us, something, and we can use that music? I think we'd like to hear you play now that we've heard you speak.
Yeah, I'm going to play a piece that is the one that's going to be premiered in Carnegie Hall by Gabriella Smart. And this is a little excerpt of this. And this is Come Softly Under My Window, and I Will Unbar
Yeah.
for Thee. And this was a bit of a text that was in that Mary Austin wrote when she was 10 years old for a drama that she was writing. And it had to do with this idea of looking through a window and seeking freedom. And I was very inspired during this COVID time that we were all behind windows seeking to touch and reach out and unbar to thee. And the idea, even in, this Black Lives Matter as well, we have this idea of needing to be unbarred to this idea of justice and freedom. And so this is an idea that comes back over and over again in this piano piece. And then it's paired with Walt Whitman's Poems of Joy, 19 Poems of Joy. And so there'll be these outbursts of joy. But meanwhile, I'm going to play for you the Come Softly to Under My Window.